People think I hated my brother because he was successful. The truth is worse than that. Marcus never had to brag. He could walk into a room, set his keys on the table, and somehow the whole air changed. Everyone straightened, everyone listened. And I became the unfinished version of a man standing 2 feet away from the completed one. That dinner wasn't supposed to be about me, at least not officially. My parents called it a family conversation, said we all needed to clear the air after Marcus bought his new place downtown. But I knew what it really was, another evening where I had to sit there, smile tightly, and pretend his life didn't make mine feel smaller. The worst part is, I don't think he even tried to hurt me. That would have been easier to hate, easier to fight. Instead, he just kept winning, and every win of his exposed something rotten and unfinished in me. If you asked my parents back then, they would have told you Marcus and I were just built differently. Marcus liked rules, he liked schedules, clean desks, early mornings, measurable progress. He was the kind of kid who color-coded school binders without being told, and somehow made self-denial look noble. He could turn hunger into discipline, exhaustion into momentum, loneliness into another item on a checklist. He never seemed to need rescuing, and I mistook that for arrogance long before I understood it was survival. People admire that kind of person because his suffering always looks productive. I was never that. I wasn't lazy. Not in the way Marcus liked to imply, without ever saying it out loud. I just moved through life differently. Slower, messier, less certain. I cared about things that didn't come with neat milestones. Images, mood, instinct. The feeling that if I kept experimenting long enough, something real would eventually take shape. I didn't want a life that looked efficient. I wanted one that felt alive. My mother used to say every child blooms on a different clock. My father said some people build careers, and some people build vision, and that vision takes time. I believed them, maybe too much. When Marcus was stacking internships and coding projects, I was bouncing between majors, then between jobs, then finally into photography, because it was the first thing that made me feel like I was seeing in my own language. My parents protected that story about me. They called me sensitive, creative, still figuring it out. They softened every bad decision until it sounded temporary, and every failure until it sounded like process. Back then, I thought that meant they understood me better than Marcus ever could. I didn't realize they were teaching me something far more dangerous, that wanting a life intensely was almost the same thing as building one. The thing about growing up next to someone like Marcus is that he doesn't have to compete with you to erase you. He doesn't even have to be cruel. He just has to keep being himself. And eventually, everyone starts measuring the room by his shape. I never denied he was good. That would have been pathetic. And even I knew it. Marcus was sharp, disciplined, impossible to distract. He made hard choices early, and then kept making them, over and over, until people stopped seeing the cost, and started calling it character. Teachers loved him. Other adults used that careful voice around him, the one they reserve for kids they think are going somewhere. Even when they were talking to me, they were really talking around him. That was the part no one ever said plainly. My parents would encourage me, sure, but even their kindness came with his outline pressed into it. Take your time, Eli. You're not Marcus. Find your own path. Not everyone is wired like your brother. They meant it as comfort. What it felt like was a softer, prettier version of the same sentence, he is the standard, and you are the exception we are trying to explain away. And Marcus never helped by saying anything one way or the other. He didn't tease me, didn't lecture me, didn't even really look at me with open contempt. That almost would have been a relief. Instead, he treated me like a problem he had already solved by distance. He'd come home for a holiday, ask polite questions, nod at my answers, then drift through the house like someone visiting a museum exhibit from a childhood he'd outgrown. His silence did more damage than insults would have. If he had mocked me, at least I could have pushed back. But when someone watches your life without reacting to it, you start to feel smaller in a way that's hard to explain, like you've already been judged. And the verdict was too obvious to bother reading aloud. I saw the penthouse on my mother's phone before I ever set foot near it. She had that careful expression on her face, the one she used when she wanted to seem impressed and worried at the same time. She swiped through the photos slowly, like she was handling evidence. Floor-to-ceiling glass, black fixtures, a kitchen that looked like nobody had ever burned toast in it, a skyline spread out behind his living room, like the city itself had decided to frame him. My father asked practical questions, the kind men ask when they're trying not to reveal they've been hit in the chest. Interest rate, square footage, HOA fees, my mother said. It's beautiful. But in that dry way, that really meant, what exactly are we supposed to do with this? I barely spoke. I kept looking at the windows. That place didn't register to me as a home. It looked too clean for that, too far above everything, too sealed off. It looked like a verdict, proof that Marcus had crossed some invisible line. The rest of us were still standing behind, waiting to be let through. He wasn't just doing well, he had built a life so polished, so quiet, so aggressively complete that there was no room left in it for the mess he came from. And maybe that was what got under my skin most. Not the money, not even the apartment itself. It was what the place suggested about him. That he had finally arranged his life in a way that no longer required the rest of us to exist. Like family was something he had survived, not something he belonged to. I remember thinking, with a bitterness I didn't admit even to myself, that the penthouse wasn't just where he lived. It was the physical shape of every hour he'd spent moving away from us while I stayed in orbit, telling myself I was still becoming something. That penthouse wasn't just his home, it was the thing that reminded me I had stood still for too long. By the time Sunday came around, I had already rehearsed the conversation in my head 3 different ways. In the gentlest version, we all spoke honestly for once. In the ugliest version, Marcus smirked, said something cold, and I finally said the thing I'd been swallowing for years. What actually happened landed somewhere in between, which somehow made it worse. My parents had the dining room set like we were hosting a holiday instead of performing an intervention no one wanted to name. My mother kept smoothing the edge of her napkin. My father sat too straight. Marcus arrived exactly on time, which irritated me immediately. Of course he did. He walked in wearing that calm expression of his, the one that always looked controlled, right up until you realized it was also a wall. We made it through maybe 4 minutes of meaningless small talk before my father cleared his throat and said, "We need to talk about the dynamic in this family." Marcus leaned back slightly. "What dynamic?" My mother jumped in with that careful therapy office tone she uses when she wants to sound fair. "Things have felt strained lately, ever since the move." He looked at her, then at me, and I could feel the whole table shifting toward the thing no one wanted to say first. My father finally did it. "Your success is causing tension." Marcus actually laughed once, not loud, just one short disbelieving breath. "My success." "It isn't that simple," my mother said quickly. "It's about how things feel in this house, how people are being affected." That was my cue, whether I wanted it or not. I remember looking at Marcus and thinking that if I backed down again, I would keep backing down forever. You want the truth," I said. "Fine, you make it impossible to be around you without feeling like crap." His face changed then, not dramatically, just a slight tightening around the eyes. "I bought an apartment, Eli." "No," I said. "You didn't just buy an apartment. You walked back in here with this monument to your own escape and expected everyone to clap." My mother whispered my name, but I kept going. "You act like you earned the right to live above everybody else, and maybe you did. But don't stand there pretending it doesn't do anything to people who are still trying to figure their lives out." Marcus stared at me for a second, then said very evenly, "So what exactly are you asking me to do?" No one answered right away. That silence told the truth before any of us did. My father said it anyway. "Maybe scale it back, be more mindful, less extreme." Marcus looked from him, to my mother, to me. And for the first time that night, I saw it clearly. We weren't asking him to understand us. We were asking him to shrink so I could breathe. At the time, I still thought that was reasonable. After that dinner, I told myself we had finally done something honest. Ugly, maybe, but honest. Marcus had heard it from all of us, not just in hints and side comments and loaded silences. For once, the pressure wasn't sitting only in my chest. It was on the table, where he had to look at it. My mother started texting him the next day. Nothing aggressive at first, just little things meant to soften the edges. Listings for smaller luxury apartments closer to his office. Articles about financial minimalism. A message that said, "Sometimes less space brings more peace." Another that said, "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." She showed me some of them before sending them, asking if the tone felt too pushy. I said no. Back then, I honestly believed she was trying to help us all land somewhere less sharp. Marcus barely answered, sometimes a thumbs up, mostly nothing. That silence got under my skin, faster than I expected. It felt smug, even when there were no words attached to it. Like he had already decided all of us were irrational, and was just waiting for us to tire ourselves out. So I went to see him. The first time, I texted before I left, told him I was downtown anyway, and wanted to talk in person like brothers, without our parents narrating the whole thing. He didn't respond. When I got to the building, I buzzed anyway. No answer. Buzzed again. Still nothing. I stayed longer than I should have. I told myself I wasn't forcing anything. I wasn't pounding on his door or causing a scene. I just wanted 5 minutes. 5 real minutes where he had to look at me and hear something that wasn't filtered through family guilt. But after 15, maybe 20 minutes, standing in that polished lobby under those expensive lights, I started to feel ridiculous. Small, in exactly the way I'd been trying not to feel. A week later, I tried again. This time I brought coffee and pastries from the place near his building, trying to make it casual, almost stupidly normal. I caught him downstairs before he went up. "I brought breakfast," I said. He looked at the bag, then at me. "I'm working." "You're always working." His expression barely shifted. "That's how I got here." He said it flat, not loud, not mean. Somehow, that made it worse. I left the bag at our front desk and walked out telling myself I'd made an effort. What I didn't understand yet was that effort stops being innocent the second you treat access like something you're owed. The exhibit was my idea, and for a while, I told myself that mattered. I wasn't trying to vandalize his life. That's still the sentence I come back to, even now, because intent feels important when you're standing at the edge of something irreversible. I was trying to make something true, or at least something that felt true to me. Around that time, the building where Marcus lived had started rotating local artists through the lobby. Small installations, photography, abstract pieces, the kind of thing residents walked past on their way to lives, expensive enough to pretend art was part of their atmosphere. A mutual contact mentioned it to me weeks earlier, and once I heard that, I couldn't let it go. Because what was Marcus's building, if not the perfect frame for the thing no one in my family would say out loud? I started assembling the series almost immediately. Black and white portraits, harsh contrasts, figures half in shadow, half swallowed by glass and height and polish. I wanted them to feel cold and accusatory without naming him directly. That was the line I drew for myself. I wasn't exposing Marcus, I told myself. I was exposing a type, a way of rising so cleanly that everyone below you started looking like debris. The captions came last. Success isn't always earned. Some people mistake distance for discipline. Not every beautiful home was built without collateral damage. Even typing those now, I can hear how personal they were. Back then, I called them universal. The part I really crossed was the permission. I knew the building manager would never approve the install if I presented it as mine alone. Not in that lobby, not with those captions. So I let him believe Marcus had cleared it. I didn't forge paperwork. I didn't hack anything. I just stepped into the gap where people assume family means access and certainty. I used my brother's name like a key because, for most of my life, our family had taught me that blood could open doors even when respect couldn't. The morning the prints were delivered, I got there early to watch them leaned against the wall before mounting. For one brief, sickeningly satisfying second, I thought, there. Now he'll have to see what it feels like to be looked at. I didn't expect the rush that came with that thought. Not guilt, not yet. Power. That was the moment everything tipped. Not when I took the photos, not when I wrote the captions, not even when I lied. It was when I realized I wanted him cornered inside his own polished little world, forced to stand under words he couldn't control. When Marcus came downstairs and saw the canvases, I recognized something on his face I had spent years carrying around in private, shock first, then humiliation. And instead of stopping, instead of hearing the alarm bell any decent person would have heard, I told myself that was the point. That was the day I stopped being the brother who felt crushed by him. That was the day I became dangerous. The truth is, by the time Marcus found out about the trust, it had already been part of my life for months, in a way I had trained myself not to examine too closely. My grandfather left behind land none of us talked about much, a stretch of wooded property outside the city, the kind of thing middle-class families act casual about until someone mentions appraisal numbers. Growing up, it was always treated like future tense, a safety net, a legacy, something that would matter later, when real emergencies happened. Somehow, in my father's hands, later became now, and family emergency became me. By then, my studio wasn't just one room and a few clients. I had expanded, new equipment, a second lease, bigger plans, more overhead than I should have been carrying. But that wasn't how I framed it to myself. I told myself I was finally taking myself seriously, that this was the stage every real creative person hits, the moment where belief has to become risk, or else it was never belief at all. I needed money to bridge the gap. That's the clean version. The less flattering version is that I had gotten used to the idea that if I just pushed hard enough, something underneath me would catch. My mother called it support. My father called it investment. I called it temporary help. as if the language could keep it from becoming dependence. Walter was the one who brought up the trust directly. He sat across from me in his den, hands folded, talking in that low practical voice he used when he wanted a reckless idea to sound responsible. "It's not forever," he said. "Just leverage. You stabilize the business. Pay it back. Everybody wins." I asked if it was risky. He said, "Only if you fail." That landed in me deeper than it should have, because in our house, Marcus had always been the one who proved things. I had always been the one people believed in verbally. This felt different, concrete, adult, like my father wasn't just comforting me for once, but placing an actual bet. So I took it. Not blindly, not gleefully. I knew there were papers involved, amendments, clauses, language I didn't fully understand, but I also knew my father was handling it. And that knowledge had always been enough for me. That was the real sickness in the system, I think. Not just that I was helped, but that I was raised to experience help as natural, deserved, built into the architecture of my life, the same way Marcus's absence from it was built into his. I truly believed I would turn it around. I believed one strong quarter would fix the missed payments. One good campaign would quiet the lender. One break would justify all of it. I wasn't thinking about inheritance or legality or who had signed what. I was thinking like someone who had been protected from consequences, just long enough to confuse hope with probability. When the loan started collapsing, it did it the way most collapses do, quietly at first. A delayed payment, then another. Emails I didn't answer fast enough. Equipment that wasn't bringing in what it was supposed to. A second space that started feeling less like expansion and more like a stage set for a version of me I couldn't financially support. And even then, even with the walls beginning to move, part of me still thought my family would absorb the impact. That was the ugliest truth underneath all of it. Not that I envied Marcus. That I had been loved in such a distorted way. I genuinely believed the family was there to cushion my fall. No matter how much of the floor I tore up on the way down, I kept expecting Marcus to explode. That was still the version of him I thought I understood, the one who swallowed things for too long, and then, if pushed hard enough, finally snapped. I knew how to prepare for anger. Anger is loud. It leaks. It gives you something to answer back to. What I wasn't prepared for was silence, sharpened into strategy. The first sign was my father's face. Not rage, not even disappointment, just that strained, bloodless look men get when they realize a mess they thought was private has acquired paperwork. He started taking calls in another room. My mother stopped saying things like, "We'll smooth this over," and started saying, "Let's not panic," which, in our family, always meant panic had already arrived and taken a seat. Then Marcus sent the letter. Not a text, not a voice memo, not one of those icy one-line messages he sometimes used when he wanted to remind you. He had already emotionally left the conversation. A formal letter, drafted by an attorney, addressed to both of my parents. Clean language, specific citations, deadlines, copies of trust provisions I had never read carefully enough to fear. No emotion anywhere in it. That was what unsettled me most. He wasn't trying to win the family argument anymore. He had stepped completely outside it, outside my mother's softening, outside my father's authority, outside the whole old structure where I could still imagine us pulling him back in with guilt or memory or blood. He was moving through channels none of us controlled. And for the first time in my life, I understood that family only feels powerful until someone decides it isn't the highest court anymore. I asked my father what the actual risk was. He said, "Serious." I asked if the amendment would hold. He didn't answer fast enough. That pause told me more than the words would have. Suddenly, I could feel the whole story slipping away from me. Not just the trust, the story where I was wounded, misunderstood, lashing out for reasons everyone should sympathize with. Marcus had reduced everything to documents, signatures, authorization, consent, facts. And facts are brutal when you've built your life on interpretations. For the first time, I wasn't angry at him. I was afraid of him. The collapse didn't happen all at once. That would have been cleaner, easier to survive. Maybe. Instead, it came in pieces, each one small enough to deny, until denial started looking childish, even to me. First was the gallery. I had been circling the space in Riverton for months, sending updates, acting like my next series was going to be the one that pushed me into a different tier. Then one afternoon, I got a short email from the curator. Polite, professional. She said they were moving in another direction and wished me the best. No explanation, but I didn't need one. By then, I knew Marcus had started reaching out to people quietly, not ranting, not threatening, just placing facts in front of them and letting my own behavior finish the job. Then the studio went. The second lease had already been wobbling, but once the lender pressure got worse and the missed payments caught up with me, the whole thing folded fast. I walked through that space one last time while the afternoon light hit the bare floor and made everything look more expensive than it had ever really been. It was the kind of room I used to stand in and imagine my future expanding. Now, it looked like what it actually was, a borrowed version of myself. The online part was uglier. I had spent years curating that image self-made, disciplined in my own way, the artist who built something from instinct and nerve. It only took one contradiction for the whole thing to start cracking. A few comments, a few people asking pointed questions, then the silence that follows when an audience senses the story they've been sold doesn't quite hold. I locked the account before it got worse, but by then, the damage was done. Nothing stings like watching a persona collapse when you realize you needed it more than anyone else did. My parents changed too. Not overnight, and not with any noble clarity, but I could feel their confidence in me thinning. My mother still tried to soothe. My father still spoke in practical tones. Yet something had shifted behind their faces. I wasn't the fragile son they had to protect anymore. I was the liability they had misjudged. And for the first time, beneath all the resentment, I started to see it. Marcus hadn't taken anything from me. I had built too much of myself on support that was never supposed to be a foundation. I live in another state now. That still sounds more intentional than it was. People hear that sentence and picture a clean break, some dramatic act of self-preservation, a man packing his life into boxes and choosing distance with perfect clarity. It wasn't like that. I left because staying had started to feel like walking around inside the outline of someone I used to pretend to be. Every street had a version of me attached to it. Every familiar place came with the memory of who I was trying to impress, manipulate, outpace, or wound. So I left. My account stayed dark, my number changed. My mother sent a few messages at first, soft and uncertain, like she still believed there was a tone gentle enough to put the whole family back together. Then even that stopped. My father never reached out directly. Marcus didn't either. That silence should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like erasure. For years, I told myself the worst thing about Marcus was the way he made me feel smaller. That was the grievance I built my whole inner life around. He worked harder, moved faster, got further, and I turned that into a story where his existence was somehow pressing down on mine. It was easier to believe I was reacting to him than to ask what I had actually built when no one was cushioning me, praising my potential, or translating my failures into softer words. Now there is no one looking at me that way. Not my parents, not him. And somehow, that is worse. Because distance has a cruel way of clarifying things. Marcus did not steal my life. He did not engineer my stagnation. He did not force me to confuse support with entitlement, or love with rescue, or possibility with progress. He just kept moving. I was the one who turned his momentum into my excuse. I was the one who needed him close enough to resent. Because as long as I was reacting to him, I never had to become fully responsible for myself. That is the part I hate sitting with. Not that I lost, that I was never really in the same fight. He wasn't trying to defeat me. He was trying to get free. And while he was building a life, I was building a vocabulary for why mine hadn't started yet. I used to think Marcus made me feel invisible. The truth is, I made him the center of my life for so long that when he finally stopped looking back, I had no idea who I was without him there to blame. If this perspective hit a nerve, that's probably the point. This story was created by Villain's perspective for entertainment purposes only. Do not imitate, justify, or reenact any behavior in real life under any circumstances.